follows. Bill Carrico, the visionary chief architect behind X4 Secure Internet, is not just an IT professional and cybersecurity specialist. He's a multifaceted talent with a passion for tennis, a flair for writing and songwriting, and above all, a dedicated ambassador for Christ. He's also a beautiful singer too. Explore his groundbreaking work at x4.com, where innovation meets security. Bill's latest literary endeavor, Profiles in Deception, a historical reset, delves deep into the shadow government's involvement in the JFK, MLK Jr., and RFK assassinations, and the long-standing rigging of U.S. elections since Truman surprised the world in 1948. The book showcases his commitment to unveiling truth and fostering transparency, both of which are essential to find peaceful solutions in our troubled world. He is also a '69 graduate of Wales Fleming High School and a 1973 graduate of Vernon College, as well as a past president of the Golden Colonels. I introduce Bill Carrico.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that nice introduction. I didn't write that, by the way. But there was a message, a hello from Johnny Garland, and his brother is Buck Garland. Anybody remember Buck? And Buck's down in North Carolina. So he's doing well. And I'll be sending pictures. Well, I'm going to give up on that. That was a little too tight for me. Okay, so got to start with a joke. You're going to talk to people, it's a good idea to relax. And the joke is about a grandmother who was giving her granddaughter some advice. And she said, I want to give you 5 tips. Number 1, it's important that a man helps you around the house and has a job. Number 2, it's important that a man makes you laugh. Number 3, it's important to find a man you can count on and doesn't lie to you. Number 4, it's important that a man loves you and spoils you. And number 5, it's important that these 4 men don't know each other. I've been in Roanoke the last 5 years, taking care of my 100-year-old mother, Louise, Huntington Court United Methodist Church. Anybody here from Huntington Court Methodist? And I see Lynn Dent's hand go up. I was a little kid and remember Lynn and Mr. Drumheller and family. This is my wife, Patty. Patty is a native Texan. We've been married 51 years. That usually gets some applause. I like to share the secret about that. We have date night once a week. Hers is Friday, mine's Saturday. On our 25th anniversary, she had wanted to go to Hawaii all this time. I took her to Hawaii. And on our 50th anniversary, I went and picked her up. And that gave us, this last year, we've had so much to talk about, I just can't tell you. But as a writer, you heard in there that a couple things, if you listen to that intro, that was written, I was interviewed on a program a month ago, and one of their publicists wrote that up, and that's how they promoted my interview. And the interview was about the 2 books I've written recently. One's about my daughter who's in prison. And it's a powerful story of injustice, and we've been fighting it for 10 years. She got one of the longest sentences in the history of our country. And she was sentenced to almost 20 years without parole as a first-time nonviolent offender for burglaries that she didn't commit. So she's been in prison 10 years, and she is a strong believer, and she's made an impact in a very dark place. And she says that no one can rob us of our joy. We have to give that up. And she refuses to give up her joy. So she's just an inspiration to all of us. We have a pardon application in, so please pray for our daughter. And we're hoping to hear something soon, and that would give her a conditional pardon. As a topic tonight, I thought I'd just talk about some close calls and then close with a phone call. And in my career, I'm not sure I've ever talked for just 15 minutes, so this will be a first if I stick to that. But what time did I start? I want somebody to give me a 5-minute warning. Would somebody agree to do that? All right, so 15 minutes. I just want you to make sure I see you. 5-minute warning. And I have been writing books while I've been taking care of my mom. Mom turned 100, and we've been here 5 years taking care of her. And during that time, because she's still able to function quite a bit, we've been able to work on things like our daughter's situation. And then I found so many things, and God's directed our path into so many interesting places that I started writing it down because I feel, well, it's like if you're a witness to something and you know something's not right, you have an obligation to everybody, because if anybody loses their freedom unjustly, we all suffer. And so we need to speak out on that. And the book that I have written on my daughter and on Profiles in Deception, I'm going to give Patty the links, and she'll send those to you, and you can have those as my gift. And I have part of them in audio, but they're ebooks, okay? And that if you go to that website that she mentioned, x4.com, it's interesting that in 1996, I was big into an IT world, and that's the story I'm going to close with, is how I got real close to IBM and traveled the world, and I wanted to tell that story because it's fascinating. But the theme in our story is that God directs our steps, and God directs every encounter, including the fact we're here tonight, that you came and you showed up and that we showed up. And by the way, wasn't that a great meal? I mean, that was significant. Don't put that up yet. I want to get seconds when I'm done. Not really. But anyway, there's a verse in Ephesians that actually encourages us with that fact that God has prepared things for us in advance to do that we might walk in those things. And so we just have to, I think, do Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 as trust in the Lord. How many people know that one? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your path. And so on that path, in the last few years, it's been amazing, the people, because of the skills that I developed writing my first book and proving my daughter's innocence. 2020 election rolled around, and I volunteered. I knew there was going to be a lot of challenges, and went out and found tons of election fraud. Unbelievable. And then realized what was actually happening. And I'm not going to get into too much of that. I'm going to tell you about some things politically that I think you'll find interesting. But because of the skills that I had developed, both as an IT guy and then as an investigator, that's why I was able to write the book Profiles in Deception. But what I need to write a book about is spirit-led investigations, how God will bring people to you and across your path. And looking at this group, what y'all have in common is that one of the most heinous acts of violence and crime of the probably forever happened on November 22nd, 1963. Who remembers where you were? Well, there's one guy who doesn't. George H.W. Bush oddly doesn't remember where he was, but we found out where he was in this research. George H.W. Bush was in Dallas the morning of the assassination. So was Richard Nixon. How many people knew that? Everybody was in Dallas for that assassination. It's unbelievable, the things that have been published, the books have been written, but we don't really get into books that much, do we? Books are the worst way in the world to reach a lot of people. It's a great way to create a record and preserve that for those who will go out and start doing some digging, right? And that's interesting. And I want to tell you that contact me on x4.com. And if you have some time and you want to volunteer, I've got some fascinating projects that I'm looking for volunteers. And there are things like editing books that God has brought these people to me regarding the Kennedy assassination. One of the people who has 3 more books that he wants to put out is the guy who wrote Blood, Money, Power, How LBJ Killed JFK. His name's Barr McClellan, 2004, 2003 or 4 book. And we're offering that as an audio book, bringing it back. And he's got 3 more books of what happened after he published that. But he was an attorney for LBJ's law firm. Now, those are the guys who often know what's going on. And in this case, his law partner confessed to him that he organized the JFK assassination. And if you dig into the things about LBJ, it depends on who's producing it. There's biographers and there's, unofficial biographies. And the question becomes, who do you trust? If people say 2 different things, the law of non-contradiction says they can both be wrong, but only one of them can be right if they really are contradicting. But they both can't be right if there's people disagreeing on something. And so there's just a wealth of information. My book, I think, will surprise you and fascinate you. But the story about George Bush that I wanted to tell you tonight is about a close call. And that occurred in 1981. Ronald Reagan had been elected, and he was only in office for a short while, and a guy named John Hinckley, who's heard that name? We can go ahead, let's participate. Raise your hand. That's just a test of the equipment. You can put it down. Okay, we're all connecting now. John Hinckley took a gun, 22 caliber pistol, fired some shots, changed some lives. And you know how close Ronald Reagan came to die? 1/4 of an inch. But the sovereignty of God, I think, was at play. Have you heard that term 1/4 of an inch recently in terms of assassination attempts? That's pretty close, 1/4 of an inch. But in the case of Hinckley, I've been talking to a lot of people about my book, and I've been experimenting on what stories when somebody doesn't know anything about it, and especially young people. And I've been experimenting about what stories to tell. And the one that gets the most traction is when I tell them that John Hinckley's father was a close personal friend of George H.W. Bush. Who's heard that? The assassin's father was close friends with George H.W. Bush. And if that bullet had gone 1 more inch, George H.W. Bush would have been our president 7 years earlier than he was. But the whole story of the Bush dynasty is that it didn't start with H.W. Bush coming out. It started with his father, Prescott Bush. And Prescott Bush took a person from California under his wing and groomed him to be a politician who became vice president under Eisenhower, and his name was Richard Milhouse Nixon. And he's actually part of the Bush dynasty, and he got a little bit out of hand when he became president, and he chose Spiro Agnew. Remember that? Coming back to you, son? It's a little rusty. And those aren't the kind of historical facts, who was vice president here and there and other things, but Spiro Agnew had to be put aside because they had to insert H.W. Bush into the picture. And he was, in terms of Nixon, was supposed to take, according to the oil elites, the people who were involved were giving directions and choosing leaders, and H.W. Bush was supposed to be selected as Nixon's vice president. Nixon didn't do that. And so, you know what happens? Spiro Agnew gets charged with tax evasion, and he has to step aside. They put in Gerald Ford, and Gerald Ford's history was phenomenal. It goes all the way back to the Warren Commission. And all these things I bring out in the book about how these dots are connecting, and it's fascinating. But Gerald Ford became president, and the first thing he did was take H.W. Bush and appoint him to head the CIA, because the CIA was under all this investigative threats. And so they were going to have to come clean. But my book is all about the shadow government. And the shadow government was a term that Howard Hunt used to describe what happened after the Kennedy assassination. So that's when they basically set up and started doing business. So I get into all these things and the different assassination attempts, and I think you'll find the account interesting. And the ways that I found things was just, again, the Spirit led me. But I'll give you a little secret if you're a researcher. There's a number of ilms that a researcher should follow, and the one that everyone knows, if you want to find out what's really going on, follow the money. But in that list, you can also follow the murderers, because there's all these dead bodies when there's a big cover-up that people leave around. And then the other one is follow the mistresses, and there's amazing things that come out from that. But the big one is follow the memoirs. You see, part of the story about being directed is that I go to Goodwill. Anybody buy books at Goodwill? And you can find lots of books at Goodwill. But I stop at libraries, and libraries will have books on sale. And so in this last 2 years, I've accumulated a few books. But the ones that I find are amazing, and the things that I found in the books and how I was directed to these little excerpts was significant. But one of the things that I thought was just interesting is patterns in government. And just recently, just last weekend, I found out about Mike Dukakis, former governor of Massachusetts. Remember that? And did you know that Massachusetts for 24 years had 3 governors, and all of them came from the same law firm? I didn't know that till last weekend. I thought, well, isn't that kind of a small world in terms of leaders and the governor of a state? But the big leader was Henry Cabot Lodge, and he was Nixon's running mate. And he and Nixon lost the 1960 election by 2 states, Texas and Illinois. And that's in the book on how those votes were counted. And Texas was lost by, and if Nixon had won those 2 states, he would have been president. And so Nixon conceded the night before. And you can still watch his speeches. And then if you read his memoirs, he talks about the next morning, and it's real clear, I think, that he became a designated loser, and that was part of the process. And then I build on that pattern, and that's what the book's about. It's really interesting. But Richard Nixon stopped the investigation. His own biographer, a guy named Earl Mazo, headed to Chicago, and Chicago's got a big legacy of fraud. The Daily Machine, and the big cities, it's legendary, the fraud that occurs in those places. 2 minutes? Okay. And so I needed a 5-minute warning, but I can trim that. But anyway, Earl Mazo went and started finding all this fraud in Chicago, and Richard Nixon called him in and said, "You need to stop." And he said, no, I'm going to win the Pulitzer Prize. This is a big story. And he went over his head, went to his editors, and he had them cut off the story. And Earl Mazo was a Nixon biographer, but he got pulled off. And Nixon just slid away, and then he comes back, and then he winds up becoming president. And so I follow all those things in the book. In my 2-minute drill, the call that really kind of changed my life significantly was in 1993. As an IT guy, IBM lost $5 billion, largest corporate loss in history. And I called up and said, I'd like to meet and tell the people how I think you could turn the company around. And the president of IBM invited me in. And over the next 10 years, I was a guest speaker at over 50 IBM events all over the world. And that really changed my views. I interacted with companies all over the world. I built a network of intelligence people. And that's what I use now to operate, is that was just a real life-changing thing. And it put me in a unique situation. And I take that responsibility very seriously. that there's truth. We need to expose the truth. It's the great sanitizer, right? Well, sunlight is a great disinfectant. And so we need to shine a light on the dark places, thus the books, thus the book on my daughter about her saga and how she was set up. And pray for me, because I'm hoping to, again, by sharing the truth, that we get peaceful solutions going. And then, of course, my big goal would be to return civility to the political discourse. God bless y'all. Thank you for your time. And how many minutes is that? Was that 15 on the money?
You can hit the snooze bar if you want to, and go 5 more minutes.
What'd you say?
You can hit the snooze bar and go 5 more minutes.
No, but I will close with one more joke. My mom turned 100. I said, Mom, what's the best thing about being 100? She said, no peer pressure.